Smogon's modern usage stats have been seriously flawed for over 10 years.
Yet the weighted usage system's legitimacy has barely been questioned since its introduction in January 2013. Originally, Smogon used unweighted stats for tiering. Usage was calculated as follows, with times 6 accounting for the opponent's 6 Pokemon. The other formula works, since each battle has 2 trainers, again, each with 6 Pokemon. Stats were easy to understand since usage was based directly off encounter rates. They were also easy to manipulate. Unweighted stats meant bad and good players contributed equally, so anyone could spam losses with Magikarp to get it into OU. To mitigate usage flooding as Showdown became more popular, Antar introduced weighted usage stats based on user ratings. The change has worked for the most part. Higher usage has generally correlated with better performance. However, the new system hasn't completely fixed the problem, and it also introduced a whole host of interpretation issues. To see why, let's first take a look at its most important component, the Glicko rating system. Glicko ratings are not the numbers you see after playing a match. Those are ELO scores. In contrast, Glicko uses 2 numbers, a rating center and deviation, to represent your overall rating. Because your true rating is unknown, the Glicko system uses a normal distribution defined by these 2 numbers to represent where your true rating could be. Every new player starts with a center of 1500 and a deviation of 130 on Showdown. Your deviation goes down as you play battles, and your center changes similar to how ELO does. It is this ability to better represent the player's true skill that Glicko is used instead of ELO for weights. Additionally, each player has 2 sets of Glicko ratings, base and provisional. Unlike ELO, your base Glicko rating only changes once a day at 9 AM UTC. Showdown stores match results each rating period and uses them to update your base rating for the following period. Your provisional rating shows what your new base rating would be if the rating period had just advanced, so it updates every battle. Showdown uses your provisional rating and a special cutoff number to calculate Pokemon weights. If you have ever looked at the usage stat files, the numbers next to each battle format are the cutoffs. For each format, only the 1630 or 1695 cutoffs are used for tiering stats. These cutoffs are chosen based on the starter rating. 1630 is noticeably 1 default deviation above 1500, and 1695 is 1.5 deviations. A similar idea applies for the higher cutoffs. Lastly, the 0 cutoff represents the old unweighted stats. Your weight is determined by the amount of area lying past the cutoff under your distribution curve, which is calculated by its cumulative distribution function. Since Glicko ratings are assumed to have a normal distribution, they use the normal CDF for calculations. As a starting player, you would have a weight of about 0.16. Except, Smogon doesn't count players with deviations above 100 for weights with cutoffs of 1630 or more, so it is 0 in reality. A deviation under 100 usually takes 5 games to reach, which helps prevent completely new or throwaway accounts from impacting stats. Now, back to the issues. When Smogon adopted the new usage system mid-Gen 5, they didn't update their tier cutoff justification along with it. A huge problem, because the 2 stats aren't comparable. In Gen 4, Pokemon were considered OU if they had at least 3.406% usage in the tier. This is the encounter rate required for a Pokemon to have above a 50% chance of appearing over 20 battles for any player. The calculation is shown on screen. Let's read the modern cutoff justification for Gen 9 OU. It's the same. This justification no longer makes sense. Weighted usage percents are not encounter rates. Consider the following example. These 2 trainers battle, and it's the only battle of the tier. The youngster wins and the bug catcher loses. First, we update their provisional ratings. Then we calculate their weights. For simplicity, we will use a cutoff of 1500. Since the weights add up to 1, they directly represent usage percentages. The weighted usage stats clearly don't represent encounter rates here, because each Pokemon has a 50% encounter rate. In fact, most battles will have this kind of outcome, as the divide between winning and losing generally gives players different ratings and therefore different weights. Does this really matter though? The usage stats usually feel right when they're released. It's no surprise to see Landorus Therian top Gen 8 OU's charts and Magikarp languish in obscurity. This intuition is backed up by a strong correlation between weighted usage percents and encounter rates. So what's wrong with the cutoffs? Realistic edge cases. Consider Regieleki's fall to UU at the end of Gen 8 in October 2022. Regieleki had a combined average of 4.413%, and the cutoff was 4.52. If it met the threshold, it would have stayed OU permanently, being moved to OU by technicality at worst. The biggest issue with Regieleki was its consistently larger encounter rates compared to its usage percentages. By the cutoff definition, it's both truly OU and unworthy of being designated OU. A designation it missed by about 0.1%. Should it have really fallen without a second thought? Other borderline Pokemon like Magnezone and Bisharp were quote-unquote saved by the bell, considering their performance in the following 3 months. In fact, Bisharp performed worse than Regieleki during December. The drop decision clearly mattered. This assumption that weighted usage corresponds exactly to encounter rates leads to questionable tiering decisions. With contradictory cutoff justifications, Smogon shouldn't be deciding edge cases without debate. Further decisions, especially those at the end of a generation, should be scrutinized. Unfortunately, weighted stats also failed their original goal. High usage doesn't mean a Pokemon is good or even used by above average players. This stems from the mechanics behind the weight formula and usage calculation. Here's an example where weighing goes wrong. Look at each trainer's Glicko rating. Now, guess who has the higher weight? The bug catcher. Almost 3 times more weight, in fact. This makes no intuitive sense though. Why would some newbie with a much lower center have more weight than an experienced player? It has to do with rating deviation. The density of a normal distribution exponentially decreases as values move away from its center. A larger deviation slows down how much the density decreases, giving more density to values further out. This is great if your distribution center is below the cutoff, since it places more density past it. Upon zooming in, we see the bug catcher has much more non-overlapping area above 1630 than the school kid, as indicated by the shading. In context, it means the bug catcher has more weight precisely because they're new. The school kid's many battles have cemented them to most likely be around 1580, but we still have no idea if the bug catcher is truly bad or just suffering bad luck. Of course, the school kid probably is better. This is why suspect tests use a more rigorous metric when judging player qualifications, called the Glicko Exact Estimate, or GXE for short. This metric measures the likelihood of beating a starter player using the expected outcome formula from Glickman's original paper. When comparing GXE scores, the school kid clearly comes out on top. Even if we change the reference player to essentially be the cutoff so that a higher deviation benefits, the school kid still wins. Unlike the weighing function, the expectation formula consistently rewards center improvements, regardless of deviation, ensuring that center changes matter. Deviation also has a much smaller impact, as evidenced by the similarity between the lines on the expectation graph compared to the weight graph. The weighing problem appears commonly. I measured unique player ratings from public UU and RU battles for 3 days in August, and here's how player weights stack up against GXE ratings. Notice the large variation between 50 and 60 GXE, indicating that weights are worse measures of skill. Higher weight values close to 50 resemble the bug catcher, and lower values close to 60 resemble the school kid. The other issue is inherent to directly using Pokemon weight sums to calculate usage percents. It enables bad players in masses to greatly impact stats. Normally this isn't an issue because most bad players have weights that are orders of magnitude lower than above average players, so they generally contribute less than 5% to stats. However, they aren't guaranteed to have a low contribution, and there's another example to show forth. It's Ambipom from Gen 6 RU. Take a look at its set name on the Smogon decks. Ambipom was universally considered bad, but it maintained enough usage in RU because it was popular and not downright terrible like Magikarp. This is supported by Ambipom's notably low weighted usage compared to its raw usage, with its raw usage generally being about twice as high. A discrepancy this large indicates a Pokemon inefficiently converted its presence into weights. In other words, its trainers generally had below average weights. What separates Ambipom from Regieleki, who also has a similar discrepancy, is its average weight in context. Sure, they both have the lowest average in their respective tiers, but Ambipom's is below the average of all Pokemon used in RU, indicating that his trainers were below average. Contrast this with Regielecki's average, which is much higher than the OU overall average, and it's clear that Ambipom was genuinely bad, while Regielecki leaned towards being useful but on the fence. Therein lies the issue with directly using weight sums. A bad Pokemon can be supplemented with a hefty dose of mediocre and garbage players to make itself appear equal to good Pokemon. This can be teased out with the extra info included in Smogon's stat website, but the majority of users don't view stats directly. They read the forum post updates or view the much prettier reports published alongside, both of which only show weighted percentages. Combining this flaw with the problem of overvaluing deviation gives a recipe for raising garbage Pokemon into higher tiers. Spam battles with new accounts. Here's a small scale example to get Snom into NU. The player hosts 4 bots on their computer and uses Tor to give them all different IPs. There are 4 bots to ensure they can always play a different bot each match. The bots all have teams of just Snom and search for NU matches in pairs. The goal is to boost the Glicko centers of 2 bots at the cost of the other 2, as having 2 at 1550 and 2 at 1450 produces more weight than having all at 1500. Thus, 2 bots are designated as losers and the other 2 as winners. The winners will only lose if it's necessary for continued instant matching. If a bot matches a real player, it will timer stall and move once at the last second, to make time for its intended partner to search for its other option under safer circumstances. If the bot has under 100 deviation, it plays for 3 turns. Otherwise, it will stop at turn 2 to prevent the opponent from affecting the usage stats. It typically takes 5 battles before the bots affect the ratings, but as long as the winners can maintain a center around 1500, they will have an impact. After all, players with similar ratings kept Ambipom and RU throughout Gen 6. The bots will make new accounts and wait after 12 battles total, since IPs are limited to 12 battles per every 3 minutes. How effective would this be in theory? Let's say the winners maintain a center of at least 1500 per each weighted battle. Then each winner would earn at least 0.53 weight every 3 minutes. We can run a sequence 20 times per hour, so the hourly earning is as follows. If run for a whole day, the bots will likely earn at least 509 rating for Snom. Given that Veluza at the bottom of Gen 9 NU usage has only about 474 total weight, it should certainly be possible to get Snom to NU. This is harder for tiers with more battles since one will need more weight and real players will pop up more frequently. Current Gen OU is especially difficult because it has a higher cutoff and users must be within 50 ALO to match instantly. This plan is especially practical because it requires such little resources. Anyone with the know-how and an internet connection can run it, and the low volume of battles means it won't come close to DDoSing Showdown. As a proof of concept, I got Whismur to the top of Gen 8 ZU during December 2022 by manually battling myself for an hour. This was right after Scarlet and Violet came out, so the tier was pretty dead. It probably would have worked better if the ladder didn't error so frequently, but thankfully Showdown staff fixed this long-standing issue last April. The weighing formula and usage calculation method must be fixed to prevent low usage flooding. I propose changing the weighing formula to use Glickman's expectation function and implementing a bucketing system for weights. Weights would go into a bucket representing their skill range, and each bucket would calculate a usage percent with other buckets of the same tier. Overall usage stats are then calculated by adding up bucket usage percentages with each bucket weighed according to its importance. This system enforces Antar's original principle, ensuring mediocre players cannot overrun stats. Unfortunately, with the usage stats currently on life support, chances are that this video alone won't change things, especially since Pokemon Showdown's owner, Zeril, has been inactive for at least the past year. However, I'm hopeful the bot procedures will encourage someone to try raising Magikarp into the lower tiers and get people to seriously care. I'm aware that there's a quote-unquote easy way out, preventing proxy IPs from contributing to the usage stats. However, it doesn't make usage flooding less possible, just slightly more expensive. One could buy a residential proxy to bypass the self-battle restrictions instead. I'd like to end by stating that I am publishing this because I care. I'd love if Smogon had a robust and easily interpretable usage stat system, and I'd be glad to help rebuild. However, my experience has shown that the community needs serious reasons to make changes. If possible abuse was reason enough for Antar to originally take action, it should still be a valid reason now. Please read my paper. If you were wondering why Ambipom to the top and Gen 8 Hitmontop weren't mentioned, it's because they were used by genuinely good players. It's an entirely different issue.